The tavern door slammed open hard enough to splinter the jamb. A wave of rain-soaked wind rolled in, carrying salt, blood, and gunpowder on its breath. Inside the lantern-lit gloom of the broken anchor, Elias Flint, coat torn, knuckles bleeding, took one look at the man about to die and knew the night had already chosen its victims. The condemned stranger stood in the center of the room, wrists raw from iron manacles hidden beneath a threadbare coat too thin for the storm. He didn't cower. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his chin and met Elias's eyes with an expression that said, "I'm already dead, but you might still matter." For half a heartbeat, Elias considered walking away. He had contraband quinine in his pocket, medicine worth a dozen hangings if the garrison caught him. But the stranger's gaze held a plea older than language. "Someone see me before I disappear." Then the garrison sergeant stepped forward, boot heel grinding sawdust into the blood. "Dr. Jonah Calder," he announced, voice thick with satisfaction. "Spy. Abolitionist. Murderer. Dawn tomorrow the gallows welcome him home." The words landed like a musket shot. Tavern chatter died. Even the fiddler bow froze mid-scrape. Across the room a runaway slave girl, no more than 16, pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide as storm lanterns. Calder had shielded her from the sergeant's whip minutes earlier. Now the whip's owner wanted Calder's life as payment. Elias felt the weight of 3 years at sea, 3 years of swallowing his tongue while men were broken for lesser crimes, settle in his gut like lead. Thunder cracked outside. Lantern flames shivered. The sergeant raised his fist. "Any man here still thinks this traitor deserves mercy?" Silence. Then Elias stepped between them. He didn't speak. He simply rolled his shoulder, letting his sailor's coat fall open to reveal the hilt of a cutlass scarred by Caribbean coral. Every scar told a story. Tonight they told the sergeant to back down. The sergeant's lip curled. "You'd defend a spy, sailor?" Elias tasted iron where he'd bitten his tongue. "I'd defend a man from a beating he never earned." The room held its breath. The sergeant laughed, low, ugly, and swung. Elias ducked. Wood splintered from the table edge. A tankard shattered. Ale hissed across the floorboards like spilled blood. Chaos erupted. Tables overturned. Knives flashed. Someone screamed. Calder, hobbled by chains, tried to shield the girl and took a fist to the temple for his trouble. Elias caught the sergeant's next punch, twisted, and drove his shoulder into the soldier's ribs. They crashed into a stack of barrels that exploded into rolling thunder. Rain lashed through the open door, mixing with sweat and ale. The air smelled of fear and ship tar. For 30 seconds the tavern became a battlefield. Fists met flesh. Boots met bone. Elias fought with the desperate efficiency of a man who'd once been flogged for another man's cowardice. Never again. When the dust settled, the sergeant lay groaning in a puddle of rum. Calder knelt beside the girl, whispering reassurances in a voice hoarse but steady. Elias wiped blood from his split lip and felt the room's eyes on him. Not gratitude, not yet, but something closer to reckoning. Outside, a church bell tolled midnight. 8 hours until dawn. Calder looked up. "You didn't have to do that." Elias shrugged, chest heaving. "Didn't feel like a choice." The stranger studied him with a scholar's precision. Choices always feel like choices afterward. From the shadows, a pair of garrison soldiers stepped forward, muskets raised. One barked, "Both of you against the wall." Elias's hand twitched toward his cutlass, but Calder's quiet voice stopped him. "Not yet." The soldiers dragged Calder toward the door. As they passed, Calder pressed something small and warm into Elias's palm, a folded scrap of blood-stained paper. "Keep this," he whispered. "If I hang, show it to the wind." Then the night swallowed him. Elias stood alone in the wreckage, heart hammering against his ribs. He unfolded the paper. In hurried charcoal, a single line: "Liberty Chain, Dawn, trust the tide." Outside, the storm howled like a warning. Elias closed his fist around the note. 8 hours. One condemned man. One sailor who just learned the price of mercy. The tavern door banged shut behind him, sealing the question in the dark. Would you risk the noose to save a stranger's life? The clock started ticking. Midnight had already curdled into memory when Elias Flint dragged his longboat up the mud-slick ramp of Cutlass Wharf. Fog rolled in off the harbor like a living thing, tasting of salt and coal smoke. Every breath carried the sting of winter that had come too early. He should have been 3 miles offshore by now, sails full, profit secure. Instead he knelt beside a water-bloated crate marked fishing tackle and prayed the soldiers on the pier were too drunk to notice the way the wood sweated quinine instead of brine. 3 months at sea had taught Elias the weight of silence. Silence kept men alive when cannons couldn't. But tonight's silence felt like betrayal, because inside that crate lay 80 vials of Jesuit's bark, medicine worth more than gold to the fever-ridden crew still chained in the hold of the merchantman Nightjar. Smuggling it past the Crown's blockade was a hanging offense. Letting his crew die was a heavier one. Somewhere between those two sins, Elias had convinced himself the ledger in his coat pocket, inked with names, dates and bribes, would balance the scales. He slipped a crowbar under the lid. The nails sighed free. Amber glass glinted beneath oilskin like bottled starlight. For a moment he allowed himself the fantasy of walking away, sell the quinine in Charleston by passage to Havana, never see another English winter again. Then the fog parted just enough to reveal the broken anchor's crooked sign swinging above the alley mouth. Lantern light spilled across the cobblestones and fractured gold, and Elias remembered why he'd come ashore at all. Inside, the tavern breathed heat and wet wool. Smoke from cheap Virginia tobacco hung in layers thick enough to chew. Elias shouldered through sailors, dockhands, and garrison regulars until he reached the bar where Meg Odell, all freckles and suspicion, poured rum with one hand and kept the other on a loaded pistol beneath the counter. "You're late," she hissed. "Soldiers been asking after crates that don't smell like fish." Elias slid a silver shilling across the scarred wood. "I need Jonah Calder. Word is he's here." Meg's eyes flicked toward the back corner. Candlelight caught on iron manacles fastened to a stranger's wrists, manacles polished bright from constant rubbing. Dr. Jonah Calder sat straight back despite the chains, a book open on his knee. His coat was too thin for November, collar torn where a soldier's saber had caught it, but his gaze remained calm, almost amused as if the whole world were a puzzle he'd already solved. Elias approached with the careful steps of a man crossing a deck slick with blood. "You the physician who mapped the Liberty chain?" Calder closed the book. "I'm the physician they'll hang for it." A fiddle scraped out a reel in the background, somewhere a glass shattered. Elias lowered his voice. "My crew's dying. Fever's burning through them like wildfire. Quinine's aboard, but the Crown's blockade won't let us dock. You help me get it past the net and I help you disappear south." Jonah studied him the way a surgeon studies a wound. "Your cargo can save hundreds, not just sailors. The chain needs medicine for runaways hiding in the swamps." "How many vials?" 80. "Then you've room for 20 more passengers if you're willing to risk the noose." The word passengers hit Elias like cold water. Slaves, soldiers, deserters, maybe even the girl Meg had hidden in the root cellar last week. Each name on Jonah's ledger was a death sentence if discovered. Elias felt the paper's edges through his coat, thin protection against the Crown's justice. Before he could answer, the tavern door exploded inward. Wind and rain swept in with the sergeant, 6 feet of scarred arrogance in a red coat. Lantern light glinted off brass buttons and bayonet steel. Behind him, 2 privates dragged the runaway girl by her wrists. Her lip was split, fear swam in her dark eyes. "My property," the sergeant announced, loud enough to still every fiddle string. "Tried to slip aboard a fishing smack. Dr. Calder here gave her false papers. Both crimes carry the same penalty." He backhanded Calder. The physician's head snapped sideways. Blood dotted the open ledger like punctuation. The sergeant turned to Elias, recognizing the sailor's coat. "And you, smuggler, aren't you? The lieutenant's been looking for crates that don't stink of mackerel." Elias's hand brushed his cutlass hilt. One slash and the sergeant's throat would open like a gutted fish. But 3 muskets leveled at his chest before the thought finished forming. Calder spat blood, voice steady despite the iron. "Sergeant, your quarrel's with me. Let the girl go." The sergeant laughed. "Hang first, ask later." That was the moment Elias understood the ledger wasn't just paper. It was fuse and powder. Every name inside, dockworkers, lighthouse keepers, tavern maids, stood one betrayal away from the gallows. Saving his crew meant saving them all. Abandoning Calder meant watching the chain unravel. Interactive beat, an on-screen prompt flickers. Would you risk your crew's cure to save strangers you've never met? Comment safe or sacrifice below. A 90-second timer starts, heartbeats sync to the drum of rain on the tavern roof. The sergeant gestured, privates shoved Calder toward the door. Manacles clinked like funeral bells. Elias caught Calder's eye across the smoky room. In that shared glance passed an entire conversation. Trust the tide. 8 hours till dawn. Bring the quinine. Bring the fire. Outside the storm swallowed them. Inside, Elias stood among broken tables and scattered cards, the ledger burning against his ribs. The clock had started ticking the moment the door slammed. 9 hours until the gallows claimed its due. 9 hours to decide if one sailor's cargo could ransom 100 lives. He pulled his coat tighter against the wind and stepped into the night, already rehearsing the lie he'd tell the dock guards. Just another crate of fish, boys. Nothing to see. Dawn was no longer a concept. It was a blade balanced on the horizon from the steeple of the ruined customs house. Elias could see the gallows, 3 black beams hammered together like a warning finger against the bruised sky. 8 hours had bled to 6, and every lantern that flared along the waterfront felt like a fuse creeping toward powder. He dropped to the alley below, boots splashing through runoff the color of old blood. Calder's voice echoed in his memory, "Trust the tide." The tide was out, exposing muck and secrets. No help there. New obstacle, the garrison had doubled the watch. Redcoats marched in pairs now, bayonets catching the first pale light. Worse, 2 field pieces had been rolled to the square, loaded with grapeshot. 1 match and the scaffold would be ringed by a killing zone. Elias's original plan, sneak in, saw the beam vanish, was suicide in daylight. He needed noise and fire. He needed allies who owed him nothing and risked everything. At the Harlot's Lantern, a cellar bar that never closed, Elias found the first recruit, Meg Odell, hair still wet from Tavern rain, loading her father's old blunderbuss with bent nails. "You're late," she said, echoing the tavern. Price went up. "Soldiers shot my dog for barking at shadows." Elias laid the blood-stained ledger on the counter. "Not shadows. Names. One of them hanged your brother last winter. Help me tonight, we cross his name off together." Meg's eyes flicked to the page, lingered on a signature in florid ink. "Captain Hollister," she whispered. "He'll be on the scaffold at dawn." She snapped the blunderbuss shut. "I'm in." Scene cut, 2 streets over. Elias knelt beside old Sam, a freedman who stoked the garrison's furnaces by day and ran messages for the chain by night. Sam's palms were blistered from hauling coal. His voice was soft as soot. "Powder rooms beneath the platform," he said. 20 kegs meant for signal rockets. 1 spark and the whole thing lifts like Judgment Day. Elias handed over a corked vial, quinine for Sam's fever-ridden daughter. 1 hour to plant the fuse. "Can you crawl under the boards?" Sam's grin was white against coal dust. "Been crawling my whole life. About time I crawled for something worth standing up for." Scene cut, the riverfront. Elias hailed the Nightjar's bosun, Tamsin Gray, already coiling fuse line like hemp serpents. "Storm's coming in," she warned. "Wind'll carry sparks straight to the magazine. We'll light half the city." "That's the idea," Elias said. "Half the city watching the fire can't watch the prisoner." Interactive prompt flashed on screen. "Would you risk burning the harbor to save 1 man? Comment fire or freeze below." The timer counted down from 60 seconds. Comments poured like powder into a pan. Fire, freeze, fire, each vote feeding a live ticker that pulsed red across the frame. Back in the alley, plans collided. Meg would start a bar fight at the north gate. Broken bottles, overturned wagons, screams loud enough to draw every soldier within earshot. Sam would slither under the scaffold with a slow match timed to blow at first light. Tamsin and 2 dockhands would row barrels of tar-soaked rags to the pier, set them ablaze, and ride the current straight toward the warships at anchor, diversion by inferno. But every step forward birthed a new snag. The garrison commander moved the execution forward. Sunrise, not dawn. 5 hours became 4. A second rope was added. Double noose, double certainty. Word arrived. A spy among the chain had sold the ledger's cipher to the crown. Calder's name was no longer alone. Elias's was scrawled beneath it in fresh ink. Micro-resolution. Sam returned from the powder room, eyes bright with victory. Fuse laid. 20-minute burn. Plenty of time to cut the doctor loose and vanish. Immediate escalation. Boot heels on cobblestone, 6 soldiers rounding the corner, muskets leveled. Sam shoved Elias into a doorway, took the barrel of a gun against his ribs. "Run," he hissed. "Tell my girl her dad lit the sky for her." Elias ran. Behind him, a musket cracked. Sam's silhouette jerked, then steadied, then fell. The fuse line was still in his fist. 3 hours left. Elias reached the customs house roof again, lungs burning. He could see the harbor, Tamsin's barrels already drifting, tar-soaked torches sparking like fireflies. He could see the square, soldiers forming ranks, drums beginning their slow, funeral cadence. And he could see the scaffold, Calder standing atop it, head high, chains glinting, waiting for the sun to betray him. The fuse line had gone cold in Sam's dead hand. Without it, the powder kegs were just iron orphans beneath the gallows. Elias had 1 match, 1 knife, and 1 impossible choice. He climbed down the drain pipe, boots skidding on wet stone. The alley stank of fish guts and fear. At the corner, Meg waited with her blunderbuss and a glint in her eye that said she'd already counted the cost. "Sam?" she asked. "Gone," Elias said. "But the powder's still there. I'll crawl under. You cover the gate." Meg handed him the slow match, 3 feet of braided hemp soaked in oil. "One spark, sailor. Make it count." 2 hours left. Elias dropped into the drainage ditch that ran beneath the scaffold. Mud sucked at his boots. Rats squealed and fled. Overhead, he could hear boots thudding, chains rattling, the distant murmur of a crowd gathering for blood sport. He crawled forward, slow match clenched between his teeth, knife between his fingers. Halfway there the ditch narrowed. Wood beams pressed against his shoulders. He could smell the powder now, sharp, sulphurous, promising. He reached the first keg, felt the fuse hole still open. Sam had threaded cord through it. Elias only needed to splice the slow match, light it, and crawl back before the world ended above his head. But the cord was wet. The match sputtered when he struck flint. Once. Twice. On the third strike a single ember caught, glowed and held. 1 hour left. Above him the drums quickened. The crowd roared, some for justice, some for spectacle. Elias could hear Calder's voice, calm and clear, reciting names from the ledger. Soldiers who took bribes, judges who sold verdicts, captains who trafficked in skin and sorrow. Each name was a nail in the coffin of the empire's conscience. The slow match burned steady, a red worm eating its way toward annihilation. Elias began to crawl backward, every inch a prayer. Behind him the ditch widened. Ahead the fuse shortened. 20 minutes. 15. 10. He emerged behind the customs house just as the sky turned pearl. Meg stood silhouetted against the orange glow of the burning harbor, blunderbuss smoking, eyes fierce. "It's lit," Elias said. "We've got minutes." They ran. Above the rooftops, the scaffold stood stark against the lightning sky. Calder's silhouette waited atop the trapdoor. The drums stopped. The hangman stepped forward. Interactive prompt flared, fuse burning. Calder on the platform. "Comment now or the explosion ends the stream." Comments exploded. "Run, blow, save him," each word a heartbeat. 5 minutes. Elias and Meg reached the edge of the square. Soldiers blocked every exit. The garrison commander raised his sword. The noose slipped over Calder's head. 4 minutes. The fuse hissed beneath them, unseen, unstoppable. 3. The commander's sword began its slow descent. 2. Elias met Calder's eyes across the square. Calder smiled, a small secret thing, and nodded. 1. The world turned white. 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The fuse under the scaffold hissed like a snake soaked in oil. Elias' flint belly crawled through the drainage ditch, elbows grinding splinters, lungs full of sulfur and rot. Overhead, boots hammered boards. 6 soldiers, 2 drums, 1 heartbeat from history. 2 minutes and 31 seconds. Calder stood on the trapdoor, wrists bound, neck looped in hemp that smelled of tar and yesterday's rain. The noose was cinched too tight, every swallow scraped skin raw. He looked past the redcoats, past the gallows, and found Elias's eyes in the alley mouth. A nod, small, almost imperceptible. "Do it." 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Meg Odell crouched behind an overturned wagon, blunderbuss cradled like a child. Her thumb traced the flint. 1 shot left, enough to scatter the front rank, not enough to stop the second. She tasted iron where fear had bitten her tongue. 2 minutes and 4 seconds. Crowd noise rose in waves, jeers, prayers, the wet slap of sobbing. A mother clutched a boy too young to understand the word gallows. Above them all, the Union Jack snapped in a wind that smelled of coming powder. 1 minute and 52 seconds. Elias reached the keg. The fuse had burned shorter than his thumb. He fumbled for the spare match, wet fingers trembling. Flame kissed hemp. Spit hissed glow. He jammed the match into the second keg's touch hole. 2 fuses now racing each other toward hell. 1 minute and 38 seconds. Captain Hollister stepped forward, saber raised. "Any last words, traitor?" Calder's voice cut through drizzle like flint on steel. "Yes." "Check your boots." Hollister blinked. Below, the first keg reached critical heat. Wood cracked. Sulfur belched. 1 minute and 24 seconds. Interactive prompt flashed across every lantern-lit face. Comment, fire or freeze. 5 seconds decides the blast radius. Phones glowed, thumbs flew, the square became a galaxy of frantic stars. 1 minute and 11 seconds. Meg stood. Blunderbuss roared. Front ranks scattered, red coats flapping like startled gulls. Soldiers wheeled, muskets leveled at her chest. She grinned, teeth bright in gun smoke. "Tick-tock, boys. 58 seconds. Elias rolled from the ditch, coat smoldering. He sprinted for the scaffold's far post, 30 strides across open ground. Musket balls whined past his ear, splintered brick, sparked stone. One clipped his sleeve, wool burned. He didn't slow. 44 seconds. Calder felt the platform vibrate, tiny tremors at first, then a deeper thrum that traveled through the beams into his bones. He met Hollister's eyes. "Your empire's built on powder," he said. "Today it remembers." 31 seconds. The second keg ignited. A jet of orange licked up through the floorboards, tasting pine, tasting rope, tasting fate. The hangman's lever jammed, heat warped the iron. Calder's boots lifted an inch from the trapdoor as the entire structure groaned. 18 seconds. Elias reached the post. Knife flashed, 1/2. Parted like sinew. Calder dropped, but not far. The noose had loosened, yet the beams still held. Elias caught his arm, hauled him sideways as the third keg, hidden beneath the stairs, woke with a lion's roar. 9 seconds. Sound vanished, color drained to sepia. For a single heartbeat the gallows hung suspended between existence and memory, Calder in midair, Elias mid-pull, soldiers mid-aim, crowd mid-scream. Then the world tore open. The explosion was not a bang but a birth. Orange bloomed upward, shredding planks, scattering iron nails like grape shot. The Union Jack flared, threads unraveling into burning confetti. Shockwave knocked Meg off her feet. Her blunderbuss clattered across cobblestones. Soldiers pinwheeled. The crowd became a single organism recoiling from heat and light. Calder and Elias hit the mud hard. Ribs cracked against cobblestones, lungs full of smoke and splinters. Heat rolled over them like a tide. Above, the gallows center beam vaulted skyward, spinning, trailing fire, before crashing into the harbor with a hiss that quenched flames and fury alike. Through ringing ears Elias heard cheers, ragged, disbelieving, then the sharper crack of muskets finding discipline. Redcoats reformed, bayonets lowering toward the smoke-shrouded square. Calder coughed blood, eyes bright. Still breathing, sailor? Elias tasted smoke and victory. For now. But the harbor behind them was already waking. Warship cannons rolled out, muzzles swiveling toward the burning scaffold. The rebellion Elias had lit with a match had become a beacon every soldier in the colony could see. He hauled Calder to his feet. "Run or we both hang by sunset." They ran, two silhouettes against the inferno, leaving behind a gallows reduced to blackened stilts and a crowd that would never again cheer an execution with quite the same conviction. The fuse had done its work. The revolution began before the echo died. The gallows burned itself out in less time than it takes to tell a rosary. Where 3 black beams had stood, only crooked stilts remained, charred fingers clawing at a sky the color of wet ash. Smoke drifted sideways on a wind that smelled of pine pitch and spent powder. Somewhere inside the ruin a timber crackled, popped, then sighed into silence, the last confession of a scaffold that had swallowed too many secrets. Elias Flint lay sprawled on the cobbles, lungs raw, coat smoldering at the edges. He tasted copper and salt and the ghost of the Caribbean rum he'd spilled 3 ports ago. Calder knelt beside him, wrists still circled by broken manacles, blood threading from a cut above his left brow. Neither spoke. Words felt sacrilegious in the hush that follows an answered prayer. Around them, the square was a canvas of overturned reality. Soldiers staggered, uniforms scorched, rifles pointing at nothing. Civilians, fishwives, dockhands, children who should have been asleep, stood in soot-streaked circles, eyes wide with something between terror and revelation. One old woman clutched her shawl to her chest and whispered, "We will never build another." The murmur rippled outward like rings on a pond. Meg emerged from the smoke, blunderbuss empty, knuckles white. She kicked aside a smoldering plank and dropped to her knees. "Sam?" she asked the ruin. No answer came but the drip of fire into water. Elias closed his fist around a fistful of ash. Sam had died lighting the second fuse, and let it sift through his fingers. The cost had been tallied, the debt was not yet paid. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. Captain Hollister stepped through the haze, saber tip dragging a line in the soot. His face was streaked black, but his eyes burned colder than the flames that had almost taken him. He looked at the ashes, then at Calder, then at Elias. "You've won the moment," he said, voice raw. "The crown has the century." Elias rose, legs shaking. "Then the century will learn to duck." Behind Hollister, redcoats leveled bayonets. The square tightened into a half-circle of steel. But before the order to fire could leave the captain's tongue, a new sound rose, low at first then swelling like a tide. Singing. Dockhands, stevedores, the barmaid who had once watered rum, all stepping forward with empty hands raised, voices weaving a hymn older than empire. Hollister's saber wavered, the line of rifles wavered with it. Calder stood, wiping blood from his lip with the back of his wrist. "Captain," he said, gentle as a surgeon, "your scaffold is gone. Your witness is gone. All you have left is the story, and the story has slipped its leash." Interactive prompt hovered ghost-like above the crowd. Choose the next chapter, escape by SA or stand and fight. Comment now, poll closes in 60 seconds. Phones glowed like lanterns, the hymn became a chant counting down the votes. 58. 57. Elias felt the moment pivot. He reached into his coat and pulled out the last intact page of Calder's ledger, the one with the sketch of the gallows now crossed out in charcoal. He held it high so every eye could see the black X slashed across the beams. Then he tore the page straight down the middle. Half he pressed into Calder's hand, half he tucked into his own breast pocket. "Two halves of the same revolution," he said. "One sails south to free the chain. One stays to remind the crown that fire answers rope." The chant reached 0. The poll flashed, SA 61%, fight 39%. Hollister's saber lowered an inch, uncertain for the first time in a career built on certainty. From the harbor came the low moan of a ship's horn, the nightjar, black sails reefed, waiting beyond the breakwater. Tamsin Gray stood at the rail, silhouetted against the rising sun, one arm raised in signal. A longboat scraped the dockside, oars lifted like wings. Elias turned to Meg. "You coming?" She glanced at the smoldering ruin that had once been Sam, then at the crowd now pressing closer to shield them from redcoat sight lines. "Someone has to teach these bastards the price of powder," she said. "I'll stay. Make them remember tonight every time they strike a match." Calder clasped her forearm. "Your name's already in the chain. We'll meet again on free soil." Elias and Calder sprinted for the longboat. Behind them, the crowd closed ranks, hymns swelling, bayonets hesitating. Hollister's shout was swallowed by wind and song. Oars bit water, the current grabbed the hull and flung them toward open sea. As the nightjar heeled and caught the wind, Elias looked back once. The square was shrinking into a painting, ash, ember, silhouettes, yet something new had been sketched onto the canvas, possibility. He touched the torn page in his pocket, felt the charcoal smudge between thumb and forefinger and understood the promise. Years later, travelers would tell of a one-armed woman who walked the docks with a blunderbuss across her back and a ledger of names bound in sailcloth. They would speak of a ship flying no flag that slipped past blockades like a rumor. And they would repeat the story of the night a gallows burned and a sailor chose mercy over silence. But tonight, only one image mattered. Elias Flint on the rail, sunrise coppering his face, torn page fluttering like a battle standard. Beside him, Calder untied the broken manacles and let them fall into the wake, 2 rings of iron swallowed by a sea that had never bowed to any king. The nightjar surged forward. Behind, the shore receded into ember and memory. Ahead, the horizon burned gold, not with fire, but with the promise that the hardest choices echo longest, and the smallest acts of courage can redraw the map of the world.